Welcome to Cognitive Spirals, exploring the latest research into consciousness, cognition, and machine intelligence. Today, we're diving deep into a really fascinating paper, Chain of Thought Monitorability, a new and fragile opportunity for AI safety.
Fragile is definitely the key word there. I saw that title and immediately thought, okay, so where's the catch? Because nothing in AI safety ever feels straightforward, right?
Exactly. Opportunity sounds promising, but fragile suggests we're still a long way off. The core premise is that being able to monitor a chain of thought in AI could make it safer. But the question is, how much safer and how achievable is that really?
I think the title highlights the inherent challenge of the current AI landscape. We're making strides in capability, but safety is lagging. The chain of thought concept, if we can actually crack it, might be one of the first real ways to see inside the black box a little bit.
So, for our listeners who aren't totally up to speed, chain of thought prompting is a technique where you encourage a large language model to show its work, so to speak. Instead of just giving you an answer, it generates the intermediate steps it took to get there.
Right. Think of it like asking a student to show their work on a math problem. You don't just want the answer, you want to see how they arrived at that answer. This allows you to diagnose errors in their reasoning.
But the problem is that even with chain of thought, we're still often just seeing a plausible explanation, not necessarily the actual reasoning process. It's like the AI is writing out a solution that looks right, even if the internal steps were completely different.
It's an illusion of transparency. We're seeing the output, but not the underlying algorithm or process. And that's where the fragility comes in. We might think we're monitoring something meaningful, but we could be completely off base.
So, this paper introduces the idea of monitorability. Basically, how well can we track and understand those intermediate steps? And crucially, can we use that understanding to make the AI safer?
And the million-dollar question is, how do you even define monitorability in a way that's actually useful? I mean, you can track the activations of every neuron in a network, but that doesn't necessarily tell you anything about the reasoning process.
That's where I think we need to step back and consider alternative approaches. Relying solely on deep learning and neural networks might be inherently limiting. We need to be exploring neuro-symbolic methods that combine the strengths of both worlds, the pattern recognition of neural networks with the explicit reasoning of symbolic AI.
I agree that we shouldn't put all our eggs in one basket, but I also think we need to be thinking about the underlying representation of knowledge. Current deep learning is largely based on correlations in data. It doesn't truly understand the relationships between things in a spatiotemporal sense.
Could you elaborate on that spatiotemporal point, Donald? That's a really interesting angle.
Sure. Think about how we, as humans, understand the world. We don't just see a collection of pixels, we perceive objects in space and time. We understand how those objects move, interact, and relate to each other. Current AI, in my opinion, lacks that fundamental understanding of spatial relationships and temporal dynamics. It's just brute forcing its way through patterns without any real understanding of the underlying structure.
But isn't that understanding emerging implicitly from the sheer scale of these models? I mean, look at what GPT-4 can do. It's not explicitly programmed with spatiotemporal reasoning, but it can generate text that demonstrates a pretty sophisticated understanding of those concepts.
I think that's an illusion, Otto. It's mimicking understanding, not actually possessing it. It's like a parrot reciting Shakespeare. It can produce the words, but it doesn't understand the meaning.
Okay, but even if it's just mimicking, isn't that a valuable step towards genuine understanding? Maybe with even more data and more sophisticated architectures, these models will eventually bridge that gap.
That's the core debate, isn't it? Is it just a matter of scale, or do we need a fundamentally different approach? The paper hints at the latter, suggesting that simply making models bigger won't necessarily make them more monitorable and therefore safer.
Exactly. Think about self-driving cars. They rely heavily on deep learning for object recognition, but what happens when they encounter a situation they haven't been trained on? The system can fail in unpredictable and potentially catastrophic ways. A neuro-symbolic approach, where the car also has explicit rules about traffic laws and safe driving practices, could be much more robust.
And even beyond explicit rules, it needs to be able to translate the visual information into a coordinate system that allows it to reason about the car's position, velocity, and trajectory in relation to other objects. Current systems are doing that implicitly, but they're not doing it in a way that's truly robust or generalizable.
Okay, I see your point. But isn't it possible to train a neural network to learn those coordinate transformations implicitly? I mean, that's essentially what convolutional neural networks do for image recognition. They learn to extract features that are invariant to position, scale, and rotation.
But those are still just statistical correlations. They're not based on a deep understanding of the underlying geometry. And that's why they're so easily fooled by adversarial attacks. Subtle changes to the input that completely throw off the system.
Let's take a step back and really define the problem more clearly. If the goal is AI safety and chain of thought monitorability is presented as an opportunity for achieving that, then what are the specific safety risks that it's supposed to address?
I think the biggest risk is bias. These models are trained on massive data sets that reflect the biases of the people who created them. And those biases can be amplified and perpetuated by the AI, leading to unfair or discriminatory outcomes. Being able to monitor the chain of thought could allow us to identify and correct those biases.
I agree that bias is a major concern. But I also think about the risk of unintended consequences. These models are designed to achieve specific goals, but they may find ways to achieve those goals that we didn't anticipate, and that could be harmful. For example, an AI designed to maximize profits for a company might decide to lay off all the employees, even if that's not what the company intended.
And that goes back to the lack of spatiotemporal understanding. The AI doesn't understand the broader context of its actions, the impact on the employees, the community, the long-term sustainability of the company. It's just optimizing for a narrow objective without any real understanding of the consequences.
So if chain of thought monitorability could potentially address these risks, how would it work in practice? What would it actually look like to monitor the reasoning process of an AI?
Well, the paper suggests looking at the intermediate steps in the chain of thought. Are the steps logical? Are they consistent with each other? Are they based on accurate information? If we can answer those questions, we can start to build trust in the AI's reasoning process.
But how do we know if the steps are logical? That requires a framework for evaluating reasoning, and that's where symbolic AI could come in. We could use symbolic AI to create a formal representation of the AI's reasoning process, and then use logical inference to check for inconsistencies or errors.
And how do we represent the spatiotemporal context in that framework? That's the challenge that I think is being overlooked. We need a way to encode the AI's understanding of the world in a way that's both explicit and flexible, so that it can reason about complex situations in a nuanced way.
So it sounds like we're circling back to the need for more interpretable models, models that allow us to see why they're making the decisions they are. This resonates with what I read in a paper about evaluating AI safety through tracking the model's internal representations over time. The idea is to identify biases early.
I'm still not convinced that we need to abandon deep learning altogether. I think we can make these models more interpretable by developing new techniques for visualizing and understanding their internal representations. There's a lot of research going into attention mechanisms, for example, which allow us to see which parts of the input the model is focusing on at each step in the reasoning process.
But attention mechanisms are still just a black box. They tell us where the model is looking, but not why. We need a way to understand the underlying semantic relationships between the concepts the model is processing.
And attention mechanisms don't address the spatiotemporal issue. They don't tell us how the model is representing the world in terms of space and time. We need a way to encode that information explicitly so that the model can reason about it in a meaningful way.
Okay, let's bring it back to the fragility aspect of the paper's title. What are the specific ways in which this chain of thought monitorability could fail?
One obvious way is that the AI could simply be lying. It could be generating a plausible sounding chain of thought that doesn't actually reflect its true reasoning process.
Exactly. It's like a politician giving a speech. They might say all the right things, but their actions might tell a different story.
And that's where the spatiotemporal context comes in again. We need to be able to compare the AI's stated reasoning with its actual behavior in the world. If the two don't match up, that's a red flag.
So we need a way to verify the AI's chain of thought against external reality, but how would that practically work?
Think about it like this. If an AI is controlling a robot, we can monitor the robot's actions and compare them to the AI's stated goals. If the robot is doing something that doesn't align with those goals, that's a sign that something is wrong.
But that only works if we have a clear understanding of the robot's environment and the AI's goals. If the environment is complex or the goals are ambiguous, it can be difficult to tell if the robot is acting appropriately.
And that's where the need for a universal coordinate system comes in. We need a way to represent the robot's environment, the AI's goals, and the robot's actions in a common framework, so that we can compare them directly.
This is making me think of brain-computer interfaces. The advancements in decoding neural signals could give us a new way to understand how the brain processes information, which in turn can inform the development of AI models. It could potentially lead to AI with better context and intentionality.
It's also worth mentioning the computational cost of monitoring these chains of thought. It requires significant resources to track the intermediate steps in a complex reasoning process, especially for large language models. And that cost could be prohibitive for many applications.
That's another argument for neuro-symbolic approaches. By combining the efficiency of neural networks with the explicitness of symbolic AI, we can potentially reduce the computational cost of monitoring and verification.
And by focusing on the underlying spatiotemporal representation of knowledge, we can potentially develop more efficient algorithms that don't require as much data or computation.
Okay, so let's try to crystallize some concrete research directions stemming from this paper and our discussion. From my perspective, I'm really interested in how we can incorporate neuroscientific principles of cognitive monitoring into AI architecture. What are the neural correlates of monitoring in the human brain, and how can we engineer analogous mechanisms in AI?
From my side, I think we need to focus on developing better methods for visualizing and interpreting the internal representations of deep learning models. How can we make these black boxes more transparent? And how can we use that transparency to identify and correct biases?
I think we need to invest more in neuro-symbolic AI. How can we combine the strengths of neural networks and symbolic AI to create more robust, explainable, and verifiable AI systems? And how can we leverage the vast amount of training data available to develop robust symbolic representations of knowledge?
And I think we need to focus on the underlying representation of knowledge. How can we develop a universal language for encoding and representing spatiotemporal information so that AI can reason about the world in a more nuanced and meaningful way? We need to understand how to translate between different coordinate systems, Cartesian, polar, and all the others.
Those are all fantastic points. It seems clear that chain of thought monitorability, while presenting a promising avenue for AI safety, is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. And the fragility aspect highlights the need for a multifaceted approach that combines insights from neuroscience, deep learning, symbolic AI, and spatial reasoning.
Absolutely. And it underscores the importance of ongoing research and collaboration in this field. No single approach is going to solve the AI safety problem. We need to be exploring all these different avenues and sharing our findings openly.
And we need to be critical of the hype around deep learning and ask ourselves whether we're truly making progress towards genuine intelligence or just building more sophisticated pattern recognition machines.
And we need to be mindful of the potential risks of AGI and take steps to ensure that it's developed in a responsible and ethical way. The spatiotemporal understanding is more than just a technical challenge, it's a philosophical one as well.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into chain of thought monitorability. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. Until next time, keep exploring the fascinating world of cognitive science and AI.